What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the College GameTime podcast. I'm your host, Trey Smith, and we are continuing to keep the wave of momentum rolling. Man, we've got some good momentum on Apple Podcasts in particular. YouTube as well. YouTube, we saw a little downtick yesterday, and I think I know why. I'm going to explain that in just a second. But if you've been listening and following along as we've really gotten this podcast just airlifted off the ground, man, just tremendous wave of momentum. I sincerely appreciate your support. And as I have been saying every day this week, if you're listening on Apple right now, please give it a 5-star rating. And if you feel compelled, leave a positive review. Thank you so much to you listeners who have written a review, man. Those they make my day. Enjoy reading them. And I hope that we can continue to build this platform and this show into a high quality source of information, community of discussion about the American Athletic Conference. And, like I said, we're on a mission. We're going to make this the number one show for the American Conference. And I want, I'm crazy enough to think it could get ranked up there with some of the other shows that cover more than just cover more of the national landscape of college football, because we've also had some listeners from other conferences that just want to see what's going on in the American. So anyways, I appreciate the support. If you're watching on YouTube right now, you know what to do. Like, subscribe, watch it to the end, leave a comment, share it with a friend. And if you're listening on the streaming platforms, particularly Apple, I already gave you my request for the day. But it is Thursday, August 24th, and I mentioned the downtick from yesterday, and here's why. Because I released yesterday's episode on YouTube at 2:30 p.m., which, by the way, I'm still kind of messing with that. If depending on the different drops, last week I did some evening drops. I've done some lunchtime drops. I've done some mid-afternoon drops. So once we get into football season, I'll probably set a time mark. If you have feedback on that, leave it in the comments or send me an email, info@collegegametime.com. But yesterday at 2:30, it premieres. Literally 14 minutes later, Pete Thamel drops the bomb on the Twitterverse. And so it kind of took some of the luster away from my show yesterday. However, on streaming platforms, we're still looking good there. But yesterday's YouTube premiere, not so good. But that's okay. That's all we have today. But that bomb that Pete Thamel dropped was this, in case you are unaware, or maybe this is your source of information, and I don't want to assume everybody already knows. But on Twitter, from Pete, sources: the potential additions of Cal, Stanford, and SMU to the ACC are again under serious consideration by the ACC. A small group of ACC presidents met Wednesday morning to discuss financial models that would come with the additions. Those models are expected to include significant financial concessions from the schools that will be added. More meetings are expected this week. Just one vote is needed among the block of UNC, NC State, Clemson, and FSU to get the 3 new schools in. Assuming all the yes votes are in agreement with the financial arrangements, a realistic timeline for a decision is about 1 week. There's expected to be a pool of money created from these additions, and the ACC presidents are discussing how the money would be split. The mechanics of that are still to be worked out, including a performance pool for success initiatives. And this is the wildest part to me. The concessions expected from SMU include a willingness to take no broadcast media revenue for the first 7 years they are in the league. Stanford and Cal would both receive the same share, which will both be reduced but different in form from SMU's concession. In other words, Stanford and Cal are going to come in at a reduced share as well, but they're not going to take nothing as SMU is. And that, obviously the optics of it make SMU just look absolutely desperate to get into a Power 5 conference. I had the show a couple days ago where I was comparing and contrasting some of the things from the American and the ACC. But I get it. They got all the money to do it. They want to get into a conference where they can have, games with Clemson and Florida State and North Carolina or whoever, opposed to the current teams in conference that they're playing. Do you, right? To each his own. just 7 years. And I guess the part of this that I don't see a lot of people talking about, at least from SMU's perspective, is it's not so much the revenue that they're giving up and missing out on, because they've got the billionaire donor support to sustain that. Now, as I've said before, remember, with billionaires, there's always a way out if things aren't happening as fastly or quickly as they expect them to. What do I mean by that? Well, if SMU comes in there and they're just on ACC streaming and they're bottom of the pack, not saying they will be, but if they are, I would imagine some of that billionaire support that's very motivated right now by the opportunity to go Power 5 will be a little less motivated. Just my 2 cents on that. And a lot of times those guys, they have a loophole or a way out always. That's all I'm going to say on that. But the piece that I don't feel like people are really talking about is SMU's not just sacrificing a revenue share to get in, but they're actually helping their competition. And that's the part that's a little, I don't know, that's interesting to me, because that money that they're sacrificing is going to go to programs that they'll be competing with in the conference. Now, whether this thing gets voted in or not is dependent on these models that they're creating, that they're putting together on how those funds will be dispersed. And you know, there's different theories around that. So I don't feel like this is a done deal personally, though it might be done by the end of the day. Who knows the way this thing's rolling? Maybe 13 minutes after I drop this episode, Pete Thamel will say it's a done deal. Thankfully on this one, though, I'm going to talk through what the impacts of it being a done deal were. So don't worry, just hang tight with me. But, you know, it kind of reminds me of earlier this month when all of a sudden there was this huge wave of momentum for the Pac overnight was going to stay together. They were having this meeting. Oregon and Washington weren't going to go to the Big Ten, and the other, you know, Arizona wasn't going to go to the Big 12, and the Pac was going to stay together. They had this big meeting with Kliavkoff, and then literally, like later that same day is when the bottom fell out. It was announced Oregon and Washington were headed to the Big Ten, Arizona to the Big 12 short time later, Arizona State, Utah, you know. That's just it. It's realignment. I've been saying it from the jump, okay? One of the toughest things to track with realignment season is the fluidity of it, because things literally can change overnight. So whereas yesterday afternoon it seemed like this was a done deal and all these credible reporters are putting it out there, well, all of a sudden by tomorrow morning it could go the complete opposite way. But let's just say we're in a world now where they get the votes, the ACC stays intact, SMU's gone, Stanford and Cal are to the ACC. Where does that leave the American? And I'm gonna start this segment of the show responding to a question that I got on Twitter X last night from Conference UAB. They said, "What do you think the AAC does if SMU leaves? Would OSU and Wazoo, WSU, be realistic additions?" And here's how I said it. I put this up on Twitter. If you're not following me, feel free to follow me at I'm Trey Smith. Number one, I'm going to negotiate as high of an early exit fee as possible. SMU has shown that they are literally willing to pay, or in the case of going to the ACC, sacrifice anything to get in. Then I'm going to call ESPN. Then I'm going to increase my investment in current AAC teams. Then I'm going to go make my pitch to OSU and Wazoo that includes exit fee money and ESPN renegotiated numbers. Now, that's what I wrote on Twitter, and I want to speak a little bit more detail to it right now. So that first one, that early exit fee. I don't know about you, but is it fair to assume you could get 20 to 25 million out of SMU for an early exit fee? Let me know in the comments what your thoughts are on that. Maybe that could be our first question to respond to from this particular pod. What is a reasonable range of money the AAC could expect to receive from SMU in early exit fee? They've got the money, and they're obviously willing to pay whatever. You have to take into consideration the precedent that's already been set by Aresco with prior early exits. But I think here, given the circumstances, you could you could be a little more bullish in the negotiations. And I feel like 20 to 25 million. I mean, that's not, I don't think that's too high. I don't think that's out of range. So let me know your thoughts. But man, to throw another 20 to 25 million on top of the already existing $50 million worth of exit fees would be nice. Then number 2, I said call ESPN. Well, what I mean is it's not like calling ESPN for the first time. My guess is that this would be a call saying, hey, are we still good on the numbers we discussed regarding Oregon State, Washington State, and a potential merger? Are we still good there? Because, yeah, you just got the time zone with the ACC absorbing these 2 teams. Now you can get even more by us merging with this. So are we good on those numbers? In other words, I'm not saying this is like the first time they've talked. I'm confident this has been a conversation that's been had up to this point. So it's more of like hey, are we still good? Then I'm going to look at the money I have coming in, and I already have, and it's going to be paid out over some years, right? And I go, all right, how can I increase the conference's investment in the teams that are existing? Whether that's bumping the newcomers' revenue share, whether that's giving even more to the already existing, the remaining members. How can I sweeten the pot for the teams that are here? Because ultimately, SMU leaving, and I'll talk about this more in a second, but you don't have to go out and replace them. So just double down on your investment in what currently is in place. Let those resources take root and watch how those programs begin to flourish, and the conference continues to get stronger and stronger. But then 4, I said, make my pitch. I mean, I don't want to be a broken record player on this thing, but guys, I talked about this 2 weeks ago. If you recall, I talked about if Stanford and Cal go to the ACC, here's the pitch I'm making to get Oregon State and Washington State to the American. And I know half of you that watch this that are Mountain West or West Coast people, you laugh at me and think it's ridiculous, but I'm sorry. 1, if you're Aresco, you have to do it. And 2, other than the geography, you have a better case. You have a clause to negotiate your deal up. You have a deal with ESPN in place. ESPN is obviously still wanting to get those spots. That's why they're open to making this happen for Stanford and Cal to get that time slot over to the ACC. So you have the deal that's already in place. You have a conference now that can fill every time zone. And I don't know. I think when you're Oregon State and Washington State, even though this may not be as significant to them as like a Stanford or even a Cal, but in the American, you have AAU institutions in big city schools. Okay, you're losing SMU. You're not losing DFW, though. So those are just some things to think about. Do the big city, the AAU representation, the deal that's already in place, and depending on what numbers Aresco can get those up to with ESPN, would that offset the travel concerns? So, laugh at me if you want, if you're, a West Coast fan, but to me, that's a pretty sensible, logical plan of attack to try and bring it together. Now, what's the other side of this? Well, the Mountain West could very well merge with these remaining 2 teams, get that Auto 5 status, get the money that's affiliated with that conference, the units and shares and all that, or the war chest everybody keeps talking about. That's like the new buzzword on Twitter, the war chest of the pack. Anyway, sorry. But that would be huge for the Mountain West Conference. There's no way to try and spin that and make it whatever. Quite frankly, if I had to do a ratings of, the trio of Stanford, Cal, and SMU get accepted into the ACC, if I had to rank the best case scenario, the suck case scenario, and the I'd be okay with case scenario, I'd say my best case dream scenario would be OSU Wazoo merging with the AAC, got the ESPN deal in place, you get the Auto 5 status, you bring what would essentially be 13, you had 15 votes there because SMU would be gone, so you'd have 13 plus 2, 15. And I think what that would do is give you some leverage as the American to be able to go snag a couple of Mountain West schools in a couple years or a year or two, whether that's Boise, whether that's, I'm going to say San Diego State. There's a part of me that thinks San Diego State's going to hold out for a Big 12 invite, which I think may eventually come. But San Diego State, phenomenal program. I like Air Force. I'd love to see the American add Air Force and Army in time. I think that would be a cool additions to have. And like financially, at least for that Army-Navy game. So yeah, that would be my dream scenario is figure out a way to merge with those two and the remaining, the 13 in the American and, then in a year or two, snag some other Mountain West teams. My suck case scenario, meaning this would absolutely suck, is if Oregon State and Washington like merged with the Pac, and basically everything I just said about the American went to the Mountain West. And, the money, the Auto 5 status. Now, listen, their media partners aren't as needy for those time zones as ESPN is. I'll leave it at that. But, that would suck. From the American Conference's perspective. Now, here's where it would not be the end of the world is if the 6-6 expanded playoff model stays. In fact, it kind of helps. If the 6-6 model stays and remains in place and you have the Mountain West and Pac merge, well, now you've solidified yourself with the American for sure as the 6th ranked conference. And I'm not even so sure you still don't make a case in time to be the 5th with this merged Pac, especially if a team like San Diego State ends up going to the Big 12 anyways. Don't know if they would under those circumstances, but who knows? And then what would I be okay with? I'd be okay if Oregon State, Washington State, well, and this is part of me just not really knowing how these media things work, but if Washington State, Oregon State just joined the Mountain West, like they had to leave the Pac, I don't know what then happens to the Pac's resources at that point. I've seen where it would go to back to those individual schools. So I don't know if there's a benefit versus a loss as it pertains to the media deal with a merger. Does that nullify the current deal? Things of that nature. I don't know. But what I'd be okay with is if Oregon State, Washington State just joined the Mountain West, all those Pac resources went back to their original schools. Not sure if that's how it works. But then, the American then chose to stand pat at 13. I'm fine with that. Now, I did get another question last night as I'm getting ready to wrap this thing up. But, who do you go after? And we talked about that, I think, last week as well. It was either earlier this week or last week. Now, the Conference USA has signed a grant of rights. So those teams, it's not like super ironclad. I think it's like an $800,000 fee per year. You're leaving early. But if those teams are off the table, now you're looking at the Sun Belt. I don't know how eager the Sun Belt teams are looking to leave, but, I like teams like Coastal Carolina, App State, App State. Right? Sunbelt. But I'd be okay with 13. Man, honestly, if you could convince Army football to join, I think I'd love that, honestly. Have Army and Navy in the conference. I just think that'd be awesome. But I'm not hard pressed for that. So let me know your thoughts down in the comments. First, what do you think is a reasonable early exit fee the American could get from SMU? Let me know your thoughts as it pertains to the case the American could make to get Oregon State and Washington State in. And you know what, for the heck of it, do you think that this thing's going to happen with the ACC? I mean, just because there's all this smoke and all this, firestorm on Twitter, that doesn't mean it's going to happen, as we've seen. Things can change very quickly. But I hope that you will still listen and watch this video, even if 13 minutes after it premieres, some more news breaks. That's it for me today. Trey Smith, College Game Time.